Thank you for joining us for this MDA Engage community webinar. My name is Michelle Barrios, and I am the Community Education Specialist at MDA. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this important and educational on-demand webinar. The webinar today is part of our larger MDA flagship community event series, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and social opportunities. Be sure to visit the MDA Engage section on mda.org for updates on upcoming virtual education events. Before we begin, I would like to say thank you to our speakers, whom you will meet shortly. The Muscular Dystrophy Association is committed to transforming the lives of people affected by muscular dystrophy, ALS, and related neuromuscular diseases. We do this through innovations in care and innovations in science. MDA's reach with research is vast. We are aggressively working to advance therapy development through support of innovative research in universities and industry and collection of healthcare data in the Mover Data Hub. MDA is the largest non-governmental funder of neuromuscular research in the country. A single breakthrough can lead to a cure, and in 2019, MDA supported 252 research projects worldwide. Our network model means findings from one disease often enable progress in others, maximizing the speed at which we can make progress. To share a little bit specifically to MDA's work in the clinical trial landscape for neuromuscular disease, in 2019, MDA awarded 25 new grants totaling more than $6.6 million towards research focused on a variety of neuromuscular diseases. Since its inception, MDA has invested more than $1 billion in research to uncover new treatments and cures for neuromuscular diseases. With that foundation, let us review the objectives for today's webinar. Participants will know what to expect when participating in a clinical trial, learn how to find out about clinical trials, how to select the right clinical trial for you, and listen to firsthand clinical trial experience of a person living with a neuromuscular disease. Now, I would like to introduce our first two speakers. Dr. Catherine Wagner is a professor of neurology and neuroscience at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and director of the Center for Genetic Muscle Disorders at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. She received her bachelor's from Yale University and her MD and PhD degrees from Johns Hopkins. Dr. Wagner's work focuses on muscle regeneration and therapeutic development for the muscular dystrophies. She is advisor for the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, the FSHD Society, the TREAT NMD Advisory Committee on Therapeutics, and an elected member of Alpha Omega Alpha and the American Society for Clinical Investigation. Dr. Janila Bibat is the Clinical Research Program Director of the Center for Genetic Muscle Disorders of the Kennedy Krieger Institute and a research associate at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore, Maryland. She completed her medical degree at the University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines, and her pediatric residency at the University of Florida. She went on to do a fellowship in the Neurodevelopmental Disabilities Research Fellowship in Neurogenetics at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. She has over 20 years of clinical trial experience. And with that, I would like to turn over the webinar to Dr. Wagner.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I am very happy to be talking to you today about clinical trials in neuromuscular disorders. I hope everyone is staying safe during this uncertain time with the pandemic, but I am here today to talk to you about good news, and that is clinical trials in neuromuscular disorders. So as the natural history of neuromuscular diseases is better defined, as preclinical laboratory research identifies new targets, and as pharmaceutical industry becomes more attuned to the unmet medical need, there has been a surge in clinical trials in neuromuscular diseases. This has led to several novel drugs that have been approved by the FDA in the last couple years to combat these disorders, with more expected in the near future. Before any of these therapeutics reach a patient, there are several years and hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in what is called preclinical work, preclinical research. These studies include discovery of disease pathogenesis, therapeutic targets, and subsequently drug discovery and evaluation of drug safety and efficacy. When there is a package of data supporting further development, a drug progresses to clinical research. This is research with human volunteers, also called participants or subjects. And they are carefully conducted investigations to ultimately uncover better ways to treat, prevent, diagnose, and understand human disease. There are many different types of clinical research. There are observational studies to assess health outcomes in a group of patients. There are natural history studies on how a disease and health progresses. There are prevention trials, which studies ways to prevent disease in people who have never had the disease to prevent returning. And this is, for example, with vaccinations, medicines, lifestyle changes. There are screening trials that test the best way to detect certain diseases or health conditions. There are diagnostic trials determining better tests or procedures for diagnosing a particular disease or condition. There are treatment trials, also known as interventional studies, that test new treatments, new combinations of drugs, or new approaches to therapy to see whether they are safe and efficacious in a disease population. And there are quality of life trials, which measure ways to improve quality of life in people with chronic illnesses. As members of the neuromuscular disease community, you are most likely going to be asked to participate in natural history studies and in treatment trials. So this pyramid shows you the various different phases of clinical trials, which I'm going to go over one by one, and also the number of years that it takes for a drug to be ultimately FDA approved. And it really does take a minimum of about 10 years from early preclinical to regulatory approval. So phase 1 trials are the first trials of a new drug in a small number of healthy volunteers. The volunteers, in human volunteers. Volunteers may be healthy or have the targeted disease. And these trials are aimed to determine what is safe and tolerable doses of drug to administer and what are potential side effects of the drugs. Phase 1 trials also provide information about how the drug is processed in the body. These trials are usually short in duration. Phase 1 trials are often designed so that a small group of volunteers, for example, 3 to 6 individuals, receive one of a predefined dose level. Doses are initially very low and are based on the toxicology data from the preclinical studies. Trials may begin as a single ascending dose, also called a SAD trial, in which volunteers receive a single dose of the drug. A SAD trial may be followed by a multiple ascending dose, or a MAD trial, in which individuals receive multiple doses of the drug for a defined period of time. Again, after a dose level is found to be safe, then the next group of volunteers receives multiple doses of a higher dose level. Phase 1 trials expose the volunteer to to some risk, and there is little potential benefit due to the short duration of the trial and the low doses administered. However, phase 1 trials in neuromuscular disease are often coupled to what is called an open label extension study, in which all participants are allowed to continue on the maximum tolerated dose. During the open label extension trial, volunteers may have the potential to benefit from receiving drug over a longer period of time. About 70% of new drugs pass this phase. Phase 2 trials are designed to provide additional safety information and to determine efficacy of the drug. These trials are in a larger number of human volunteers, for example, 20 to 300 individuals who have the targeted disease, but are restricted to volunteers with defined characteristics. Phase 2 trials are usually randomized and controlled, which I'll explain later in a bit. They are sometimes divided into phase 2A studies, which are especially designed to assess dosage, and phase 2 studies that are specifically designed to determine efficacy. A phase 2 trial may be followed by an open label extension study so that the placebo group has the potential to benefit. And 22% of drugs which enter phase 2 go forward. Phase 3 trials compare the new drug to the standard of care. The standard of care refers to a treatment that is routinely used in day-to-day clinical practice. For example, corticosteroids are the standard of care for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Phase 3 trials typically require even larger numbers of volunteers in order to demonstrate that the study drug is non-inferior to a standard of care. A phase 3 trial may be designed to expand the patient population targeted. The trial often determines what is found in the package along with the drug, the packaging insert, and what is allowed for marketing. Altogether, 55% of drugs that enter phase 3 are successful. Therefore, altogether, 8% of drugs that enter clinical trials are approved. And that number is certainly discouraging for those who are participating in clinical trials. Now I'd like to explain a few terms and features of clinical trials. Clinical trials adhere to a specific plan, or what is called a protocol, that dictates which individuals are eligible to participate in the trial, the drugs and the dosages, the tests and measures that will be performed, the study schedule, the length of the study. The protocol is reviewed and approved by an institutional review board called the IRB, which safeguards the rights and the welfares of individuals participating in the trial. The first activity of any protocol is the process of informed consent, whereby the objectives of the trial, the risks and the potential benefits are reviewed with you both verbally and in a written format. You'll have time to ask questions, and the researcher will usually ask you questions to assess your understanding. Every clinical trial has rules about who can participate. These are called eligibility criteria. To be eligible for a particular clinical trial, the individual must have certain characteristics called inclusion criteria. In addition, the individual may not have certain qualities called exclusion criteria. These criteria include things such as the specific genetic diagnosis, the age, the gender, the health history, the functional abilities. It can be frustrating and disappointing to be excluded from a clinical trial on an eligibility criteria. The purpose of having strict eligibility criteria is to ensure that all subjects are safe and to ensure that the results are accurate and meaningful. In this way, the trial has the greatest likelihood of success, allowing the drug to go for regulatory approval and then become available to a potentially wider population. After a drug is approved, it often becomes available to patients with many fewer restrictions than are required by clinical trials. As I mentioned, phase 2 and phase 3 trials are frequently randomized and controlled. So what does this mean? Randomization is a way of randomly assigning individuals to a treatment arm. Here is an example. So if I wanted to assign 40 people randomly to 4 different treatment arms, these arms could be, for instance, condition 1, that they receive wonder drug at 5%, condition 2, that they receive wonder drug at 10%, and condition 3, that they receive wonder drug at 15%, and condition 4, that they receive a placebo. So the researchers use a randomizer algorithm, such as can be found on the internet, to generate one set of 40 non-unique, unsorted numbers with a range from 1 to 4, representing the conditions above. And so here is an example of a random sequence of numbers from 1 to 4. And the investigator would pull this up, and then the first subject would be randomized to condition 3, the second subject to condition 4, the third subject to condition 4, etc. And it's important to understand that the researchers, the chief medical officer of a company that's sponsoring this, family members, patients, have no influence over this process. Sorry, didn't show that slide as I was talking about it. Okay, then what is a control? So this is a comparison group that receives a placebo, another treatment, or no treatment at all. Sometimes trials use historical controls, such as using a placebo group from another trial, or using information from a natural history trial. Controls do not have to be at a 1-to-1 ratio with treatment groups, and frequently aren't. So once enrolled in the study, a volunteer will be assessed for his or her baseline function, and then they will be assessed intermittently throughout the treatment period. These assessments are called outcome measures, and they're measures of what are meaningful in a patient's everyday life, such as longevity and function. Now, sometimes it is difficult to measure those things that are meaningful in everyday life, and so we use what are called biomarkers that correlate with these meaningful measures. And an example would be the 6-minute walk test, which has been used in a lot of neuromuscular disease trials, in which one assesses how far can an individual with a neuromuscular disease walk in 6 minutes. So what are your rights while participating in the trial? First, you have a right to privacy, that any information about you is not shared. And so, for example, you are frequently given a study number, and that is associated with all of your tests, measures, personal information, and your name, date of birth, address are not associated with these records. You have a right to have your questions answered before, during, and after the trial. You have a right to drop out at any time without penalty. And these rights are protected by the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, and by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office for Human Research Protections. So after the trial, the information collected is studied and analyzed. There is a decision made whether to go forward with the next phase. The results are often, but not always, published in peer-reviewed journals. And they are also entered on a website, clinicaltrials.gov, which you're going to be hearing more about. The results specific to the individual participants, however, are frequently not shared with the participant. That varies from trial to trial. And continued access to the drug depends in part on the success of the trial. What are the risks of participating in a clinical trial? You may have side effects from the drug that are unpleasant, serious, or even life-threatening. You may have adverse effects from the testing, such as if you had a muscle biopsy, blood testing, muscle function testing. And you'll need to make frequent visits to the medical center, likely causing missed school or work. So why participate? Many participate to play an active role in research to improve the treatment options for the diseases. You get a lot of careful medical attention during the time that you are participating in a clinical trial. And many patients participate to gain access to new treatments before they are widely available. I put an asterisk there because, as I've mentioned, only 8% of drugs that go through phase 3 trials are actually FDA approved. And so one has to factor in that the drug that they are trialing may not actually be safe or efficacious. And this is a quotation from one of the participants in a trial that I conducted that describes why he participated. To my surprise and appreciation, I find myself immersed in a medical system that overflowed with passion for its work. I was surrounded by doctors, surgeons, nurses, and aides who were attentive and engaged. I found myself looking forward to each visit and the exchange of information and knowledge. And just to put that in perspective, that is a quote from somebody who, after he participated in a clinical trial that ultimately did not lead to a new drug for neuromuscular disease. So these are some questions that you want to ask before participating in a clinical trial. You want to know who is sponsoring the trial, which company or which academic investigator. You want to know what the participant burden is going to be. How often are you going to have to come in? What kind of tests are going to be done? Of course, you want to know what are the risks, not just of the drug or treatment, but of all the studies that are going to be done. You also need to know what the degree of harm that could result. Is there a potential for nausea and vomiting, or is there a potential for death? You want to know what the chance of harm is occurring. If there is a chance of severe harm, is that 1%? Is that 0.1%? Is that 0.001%? You want to know what will be billed to the study versus the patient. Now, most of the trials, certainly that we conduct, all of the studies are billed to the trial. However, that should be clarified to you to know if there's any financial liability. You want to know what the ratio of placebo to treatment is. And very important, particularly for early phase trials, you want to know if there is a commitment to an open label extension study. I'd like to just mention clinical care while participating in a clinical trial. You really need to inform your primary care provider and neurologist about your participation. You need to continue to regularly schedule visits with your doctors because clinical trials do not take the place of clinical care. Clinical care may be affected by your participation. For example, you may not be able to change the dose of certain medications. You may not be able to add new medications or change your physical therapy routine during the course of the trial. So, oops, let's see if I can go back. Okay, so COVID-19 has certainly thrown a wrench in the works, and I'd just like to mention to you what some of the challenges are that we're having right at the moment. So many IRBs have severely limited human research to COVID-19. Many upcoming clinical trials have been postponed, and ongoing trials have largely moved to remote visits using telehealth and visiting phlebotomists, the people who take your blood. There is an inability to collect some information during COVID-19. For example, we may not be able to get MRIs, biopsies, many functional outcome measures that are done in person. And unfortunately, the result of this is that there will be a delay in completing clinical trials. We've even seen the abandonment of some trials and a delay in regulatory approval of novel therapeutics. So I'd like to just reiterate the key points. The number of drugs and trials for neuromuscular diseases is unprecedented. Participation in a clinical trial is not the same as early access to a known therapeutic. And there are risks to clinical trials, but there are also great potential rewards. So I would just like to acknowledge the team that works with me at Kennedy Krieger. This is my email and telephone number if you wanted to follow up with me personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wagner. I would now like to move to our next speaker, Dr. Bibat.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Bibat. I'm from the Kennedy Krieger Institute Center for Genetic Muscle Disorders. I have been asked to answer two questions: how you can find a clinical trial, and in selecting the right trial for you, what questions to ask. Nowadays, if you want to find something, just Google it, or in a search engine, type in the word and hit enter, and you'll be given a slew of information, unfiltered, some legitimate, some not legitimate. So here's my list of resources on how you can find out about a clinical trial. There are two portals maintained by the National Institute of Health, the NIH, the clinicaltrials.gov, and a national registry called Research Match. Pharmaceutical companies also have their own websites. National organizations like the MDA and other specific condition or patient advocacy group have their own registries, websites, they sponsor meetings, they have newsletters, mail-in letters. Your physician, your neuromuscular specialist, and other healthcare providers are also good resources. And of course, social media. Clinicaltrials.gov is free and easy, and maybe the best resource for patients, especially those new to clinical trials, even for physicians and investigators. It's a searchable registry and database of clinical trials funded by federal, pharma companies, privately supported groups, conducted in the 50 states of the United States and around 216 countries around the world. It is maintained by the National Library of Medicine at the NIH. All clinical trials, these are the interventional studies involving the study of drug, device, or biologic, are required by law to be registered. They are assigned an NCT number. It gives information about the disease, the purpose of the study, the description and study design. As what Dr. Wagner mentioned, the inclusion-exclusion criteria to determine eligibility, outcome measures, the clinical trial sites, and contact information. The information you obtain from the clinicaltrials.gov should be used in conjunction with the advice from your healthcare provider. This is the clinicaltrials.gov page. So if you want to find out about a trial, you can go and put in your diagnosis, or if you want to customize the search and narrow the list, you can put in the NCT number, and if you know the drug name or drug company, you can put it also, and as well as the investigator's name and the location. Hit search, and you will be given a list similar to this one. This one is for FSHD. You will know the status of the study, whether it's active recruiting, active not recruiting, whether it's terminated, the study title, the conditions, interventions, and locations. And if you're interested in one of them, just click on the title, and all you need to know about this study will be provided. Research Match is another portal that is maintained by the NIH. It is a national registry designed to connect people who are trying to find research studies and researchers seeking people to participate in their studies. It's also free and secure, and it makes it easy for patients to be part of a clinical trial and be involved in research studies. You have to create an account so that they'll be able to match you with research studies. This is their page. You can click on the trials, and you will be asked some questions, again, to customize and narrow the search. This is for a male with DMD who is around 15 years old, and the search resulted in a list of patients. Now, this particular study, you become interested in knowing about it, you can click on it and it will provide information. If you have created an account and registered, then Research Match will be able to give you more information, or for upcoming studies, they can match you with a study that you may be eligible in participating. If you hear from the grapevine that there is a new drug that is being developed by a pharmaceutical company and they're sponsoring a clinical trial, you can go to their websites, you can put in your diagnosis, the location, and then hit search. National organizations like, of course, the MDA, they have websites, and in their websites, they have a clinical trial page. So if you want to find a clinical trial, just click on the Find Trials here. And if you answer some questions and customize your search, you will have a list of clinical trials for that particular condition. If you want to receive personalized alerts and be first to know when matching trials are starting, you have to provide your email address. Patient registries can also be a good resource. This is Treat NMD, Neuromuscular Network. It collects information about patients who are affected by a particular condition, and these are database containing information about individuals affected with a particular disease. Registries facilitate patient recruitment for clinical trials. So you have to create an account, and registered patients may be able to participate in trials more easily. Patient advocacy groups also maintain their own websites. This is, for example, the FSH Society and the Limb-Girdle 2I. They devote a page for clinical trials. They will list trials that are currently recruiting or open. In our muscle center, we do over 50% clinical trial on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We work closely with the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, the PPMD. In their website, there is even a Duchenne and Becker clinical trial worksheet where they can help you brainstorm what are some possible pros and cons of joining a study. You can put a keyword under the pros or a keyword under the cons and hit next, and it will give you a list of possible pros and cons for joining the study. And at the end, it will even generate a summary where you can review and decide whether this study is right for you or not. PPMD also has a Duchenne registry. If you join and create an account, you'll have a clinical trial tool finder as part of the Duchenne registry. They also have a new improved platform. There's an app so that you can be updated anywhere you go through your smartphone. National advocacy groups like, of course, the MDA, the PPMD, and other patient groups, they sponsor annual meetings. And during that meeting, they dedicate a day just talking about clinical trials. You'll get to hear from the study doctors, the investigators, and the pharmaceutical companies about what is current, what has been completed, and what is in the pipeline. Newsletters and press releases or advertisements are also a good resource, especially for those with no internet access. Advocacy groups, they have newsletters that can also contain press releases from the pharmaceutical companies or advertisements. Your physician, your neuromuscular specialists, and other healthcare providers, like your occupational therapists or physical therapists, are a good resource for finding out about a clinical trial. Sometimes your neuromuscular doctor is also a principal investigator or a study doctor for a particular clinical trial. Your doctor will be able to send you letters like this one for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, informing you about the clinical trial. Of course, social media is another resource. Patient groups, advocacy groups, they have their own Facebook account or Instagram. Even the community, patients and families, they create Facebook groups like this one, the Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Awareness Group. You can browse in their account or you can join. you not only will find out about a clinical trial, but you can learn firsthand about their experiences in participating in a clinical trial. So if you find a clinical trial, one or two clinical trials that you're interested in participating, what are the questions to ask? You have to learn about that clinical trial as much as you can. So you have to contact the clinical trial site, which is most convenient and closest to you. You contact or by email or by phone the clinical trial coordinator or even the study doctor. So Dr. Wagner already mentioned what are some questions to ask, but in detail, you can ask, why is the research being done? What is the purpose of the study? What is the study drug and why might it be effective? Has it been tested before? Is this study first in human trial or has this been investigated before? What is the safety profile? And has it been effective, at least in other studies? Will I be given the actual drug? Some of the trials, as what Dr. Wagner said, may be double-blind, randomized, where you will be receiving the actual study drug with an active ingredient or placebo without an active ingredient. Or a trial can be an open label where throughout the study, you will be receiving the actual drug. Or it can be a double-blind with an open label extension study. You want to know when, if you are in the double-blind study, when will you know if you are assigned the actual drug or the placebo? You want to know how will the treatment be given? Is it in a tablet form that you take orally? Is it an injection? Is it an infusion? How often do you get the treatment? How many will be in the study? This is an important question because sometimes clinical trials have competitive enrollment. Even if you want to participate, if it's closed, you won't be able to take part in the study. What will happen if you join that study? The tests and procedures involved, the number of visits and the length of each visit. Will it require outpatient visits or inpatient hospitalization? When you're in the study, do you have to avoid medications like food, other food or activities while in the study? Will research test results be shared with you? Sometimes during the length of the trial, there will be some safety tests and procedures that will be performed. Will you be given some of the results, or if there are incidental findings that need to be addressed clinically, will those be shared with you? How long will you be in the study? This is an important question because of the time commitment. What will happen to data and biospecimens that are collected in the study? Will they be used just for this research, for future research? Will they be shared with other investigators? What are the risks or discomforts of the study? You want to know the side effects of the study drug, the procedures, what are the harm that the procedures can do for you, the time commitment. Are there benefits to be in the study? Will you have direct benefit or no benefit at all? What are my options if I do not want to be in the study? Dr. Wagner mentioned about the standard of care for a particular condition like Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You want to know what your alternatives are, if there are some therapeutic interventions. Will it cost you anything to be in this study? Does insurance cover for this? Most of the trials that we perform here at our center, most of the study-related procedures are covered by the sponsor. So you have to ask, will you be responsible for the tests that will be done during the study? Will you be paid if you join this study? Will you be given a stipend? Some of the trials that we perform here, they give some amount for each visit, like a visit stipend. Will I be reimbursed for other expenses? Who will take care of your travel or hotel accommodations? Or will they provide childcare? Most of the trials contract a travel agency who will take care of your travel needs, from hotels, flights, and for meal expenses. Can you leave the study early? Who will you inform if you decide not to continue with this study? How will my privacy be maintained, and how will the confidentiality of my data be protected? You want to know if patient identifiers and no personal health information will be shared to other investigators. What time of long-term follow-up care is part of this trial? If you complete the study, how long will the study team be contacting you? What treatment costs will be paid if I am injured in this study? You have to ask if the sponsor will cover for any cost if you get injured, whether it's just be for the study related procedures, or will it cover for anything regarding your condition? Who will oversee my medical care while I am participating in the trial? Dr. Wagner already explained to you the responsibility of your primary care physician and the study doctor. Last but not the least, and it's very important, is can you participate in more than one clinical trial at a time? The answer to this will depend on the clinical trial protocol. There are some, if you are already in one clinical trial and you heard about a new and promising trial and you want to participate, it will depend on the study protocol. Some clinical trials will not permit you to participate if you're already in a clinical trial and already receiving an a study drug or investigational product. Some clinical trials allow you to have a washout period, discontinue the study drug and have a washout period between 1 month to 6 months, and you are allowed to participate in another clinical trial. If you're participating in a natural history study or observational study, you may participate in a clinical trial depending on the inclusion-exclusion criteria of the clinical trial. What are the take-home messages, the key points? In finding a clinical trial, there are many resources that are available. Clinicaltrials.gov is the best research for patients as well as for physicians and investigators. In selecting a clinical trial, you have to contact the clinical trial site that is most convenient for you, closest to you, and you have to email, call the study coordinator or the study doctor. Ask questions, and after your questions are answered, you have to discuss your options with your neurologist, with your physicians. Once you have decided to participate, the study team, the clinical trial site, will give you a copy of the informed consent form for you to review, and the screening visit will be scheduled. Pre-visit instructions and accommodations will be provided, and the informed consent will be signed during your screening visit. I'd like to thank the MDA for giving me a chance to talk about clinical trials. Thank you so much, and stay safe, stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Bebop. Now, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Lily Walters was born in 1968 in San Diego, California. The youngest of 6, she grew up in a military family and has lived around the world, attending middle school in Scotland and graduating high school in Naples, Italy. Laline was diagnosed with FSHD when she was 15. She did not allow this to slow her down, being active in gymnastics in high school. Graduating college with a degree in accounting in 1992, Laline worked for the Department of Defense before moving to the Washington, D.C. metro area. She has since worked in her own personal business, helping others in personal finance. Laline has been and continues to be a strong advocate for FSHD research. She has spoken before Congress, advocating for the MD Care Act, at the National Institute of Health at Rare Disease Day, and to physical therapy students attending the University of Maryland. Laline and her husband Gary have been together for over 30 years. They have 4 children, Eric, Lauren, Colin, and Catherine. Go ahead, Laline.
Hello, thank you for having me speak to you today. I'm Laline Walters. I was 7 years old when my family realized I had a problem. I was at my cousin's wedding, and I was asked to smile for the photographer. No matter how much I tried to smile to make everyone happy, I just couldn't do it. When we returned home, my mother set out to find the answers. I was treated for depression, going from one doctor to the next for 8 long years. Finally, at the age of 15, after years of being misdiagnosed, a muscle biopsy revealed that I had facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, or FSHD for short. Fast forward 10 years, I became pregnant with my first child, and just like other parents, all I wanted was a healthy baby. However, I passed on this dreaded disease to my son. My son started to show all the signs that I knew all too well. What I didn't understand at the time was that he had infantile onset. His regression would be significantly faster than mine. Just as my mother had done years before, I set out to find answers. I heard about a meeting for FSHD support group that was going to have a doctor speak about clinical trials, and I wanted to find out more. I had read about clinical trials before in the MDA Quest magazine, but I had never seen any on FSHD. Since then, I have been in 3 clinical trials and considered others. My first trial was a double-blinded trial, which meant that I didn't know if I was going to be on the placebo or the drug. I had to do blood work, muscle strength testing, a muscle biopsy, and an MRI. This trial lasted about 6 months. I received infusion every 2 weeks, so this meant traveling to the test site every 2 weeks. Luckily, it did not involve overnight stays, and the facility was relatively local. My second trial was an open label trial, which meant this time I knew I was on the drug. This study was much more in depth. I had to record my daily activity. I had to wear a leg and an arm monitor. There was extensive blood work throughout the trial, and I was receiving an infusion every 2 weeks. As the trial moved forward, the infusion doses increased to weekly. Again, I had to do more MRIs several times throughout the trial. My third trial was my least favorite of all the trials I had done. This trial required me to have an MRI before the trial and again several weeks later. This trial was administered by injections into the muscle, so therefore it required EMG in both arms. Every time I received an injection, I had to have an EMG. If you've ever had an EMG test done, then you already know they aren't fun. And in the 7th month of the trial, I had an adverse reaction and had to be removed from the trial. This brings up an important point about trials. I was in my 7th month. Was I really having an adverse reaction to the drug? We don't know that, but that's the point. These are conducted with every possible safety of the patient being the biggest concern. So no chances are taken. If you have an adverse reaction, you're more than likely to be removed. I'm still glad I participated because some of the timing involved, this trial did require me to make overnight stays. I'm not currently involved in any clinical trials at the moment, but I remain open to new ones if the right one should arise. One thing I will tell you is that every trial has its own experience, both positive and negative. Some of the positive reasons that I consider about getting involved that you may also consider getting involved in a clinical trial. We get to be a part helping others and possibly ourselves in finding a treatment for our disease. You may receive regular medical checkups as part of the clinical trial, and you may not have to wait for a treatment if the drug is approved for everyone. That was the biggest one that I considered every time. Some of the negatives can be time. You may have to take time off of work or time away from your family, especially if you have to travel or stay overnight in a hotel or a hospital. Cost. Not all clinical trials will pay for your travel expenses. Blood work or IVs? Well, if you're afraid of needles, you may want to ask this up front. After years of feeling like a pincushion, this was one of my issues that I had to resolve for myself up front. Will you have to wear a monitor and record your daily activity? Realize you could experience some serious side effects and must be removed from the trial. If you're claustrophobic, you may have to have an MRI. So you have to think about that. You could wind up on the placebo instead of the actual drug. This is what happened to me and my first. Here are some questions you may want to ask considering a drug trial. How long is this trial? Can I be involved in more than one trial at a time? How long do I have to wait to participate in another trial? Will I be reimbursed for my travel expenses? What phase is the trial in? Is this a double-blinded study or open label? And last but not least, If you're removed from a trial due to adverse reactions, can I participate in other new trials? I hope this has helped you, as it helped me when I made a decision. Good luck, and thank you again to the MDA for allowing me to be part of this trial, this talk.
Thank you so much, Laleen, for sharing your story. Thank you, Dr. Wagner, Dr. Bibat, and Laleen. We sincerely appreciate your time and expertise and everything you do for the neuromuscular community. The information you shared was incredibly valuable and educational. If you have any questions around the MDA Engage program and/or items from this webinar, please feel free to email them to mdaengage@mdausa.org, and we will do our best to answer them. Do also remember MDA's Resource Center is a wonderful resource for MDA families. The MDA Resource Center is available to provide one-on-one support via phone or email for individuals and families looking for information about the diseases and MDA's programs and more. This concludes the MDA Engage webinar, Clinical Trials, Research, and Participation. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to you joining us for webinars and additional educational events.